In Midnight, a lot of changes have come to Quel'Thalas. We've really taken a look at the zone, the region, the city, and rebuilt it from the ground up.
Quel'Thalas means a lot to a lot of players, and it also means just as much to a lot of us devs as well. And we really just hope it feels like coming home.
Quel'Thalas is the ancestral home of the Blood Elves, and in Midnight is going to be a staging place for our defense against the Void. Visual development is the team in charge of concept art for the game. So what that means is essentially working with the art directors, other artists in the team to help them develop the vision early on for the expansion. Visual development, specifically, the role is about look deving, defining the look of any new cultures, any new factions. We do a lot of that early on sort of world building exploration that helps define what the identity of those people are. And then later down the line, make sure that the final result still aligns with the overarching goals. So the cool thing about visual development is that we can do it with any kind of medium. You'd be surprised, there's some work that's actually easier to do on paper than digitally. So these are drawings that Katarina Puli and the Visiv team did, and she actually made these in charcoal. For this stuff, she was exploring like different ideas for the light bloom assets. So you can see all those different plants. This is stuff that the environment team would be really interested in, what the different pieces that make the biome look like. Actually, we did like a series of these that was for Eversong Forest. This one's we did with gouache, which is very similar to watercolor. The prop team reached out and they're like, oh, you guys have any paintings that we could use? We ended up just scanning them, maybe touching them up a little bit, and then the prop team took them and turned them into actual assets that were placed around the city, and then eventually they ended up being in housing. One of the more challenging areas that we had to do for Quel'Thalas specifically was the light bloom. Normally we think of the light as like a happy, sort of inviting, healing archetype. But for the light bloom, we actually wanted to tell a story that it was something sinister, something dangerous about the way that it was showing up in Eversong. We did so many versions of plant kits, conversations about like, should it be more beautiful? Should it feel more like it belongs in Eversong? Should it feel more like it doesn't belong? I think in the end, we arrived at a really nice place. And I think we were able to do that, but actually leveraging a little bit more of that in-game concept. What we ended up doing is just taking a lot of like existing assets that could be stand-ins for like what the final assets might be like. We didn't have any wreaths that I thought would feel good in the environment, so I ended up finding these like bamboo assets from Mista Pandaria and just kind of using them as like stand-ins. And then just like locally in our computer, we just recolor the assets to sort of give us like a really high level impression of what the space might feel like. I think after we did that, we were able to get a line of like, okay, this is hitting the notes of overall what we're after.
On World of Warcraft, environmental art is kind of split up into 3 different sub-disciplines. We've got our dungeon team, which is basically all the dungeons, raids, all the architecture that you see in the game. Then we have our prop team, which is all the man-made items, so boxes, crates, tables, and chairs. And then my team focuses on everything in the outdoor world. So we're called the environment team, but think of foliage, bushes, skyboxes, trees, terrain textures. Production-wise, the environment art team works very closely with the Viz Dev team, which takes all that great concept art, all that great visual development, and then we translate that into the 3D models, 3D textures, the lighting in the zone. We're kind of like in the middle between like the early pre-production and then the actual implementation of the zone. One of the biggest challenges in going back to an existing zone and reimagining it is how much we honor the nostalgia that players have. So Eversong traditionally is this very autumnal, warm color palette. How do we present that in a new and different way? And also, how does that interact with the Voidstorm? We did want to make sure that players' expectations were being met as far as Eversong has this very iconic look. But how do we put a twist on that? How do we represent it in the northern part of the zone as opposed to the southern part? When you get closer to the Voidstorm, things get cooler, but as you move further away, it gets closer to the Eversong that players are more likely to remember and be nostalgic for. Preparation for a zone like this is actually a lot of fun because the majority of the team is super familiar with Burning Crusade, with Eversong, with that entire region. For us, it was looking into classic WoW, classic Burning Crusade, and even going further than that and looking at an internal debug client for like the original Burning Crusade, like as it was back then. Going and looking in that and comparing the lighting, comparing the trees and the atmosphere and the mood, that definitely helped put us in the right mindset for re-envisioning Eversong. Right now we're taking a look at our Midnight client, but also our original Burning Crusade debug client. So this is what we use to kind of check everything in our Burning Crusade Classic, make sure it was super authentic to the original game. And one thing that I like to do when working on a zone like this, where we're reimagining something that exists, is to take a look at the original implementation. So we can really appreciate everything from the 4x3 monitor to the low resolution, like what was the vibe, what was the mood that we were going for here. But you can kind of see that we're really trying to be authentic to the experience that was in Burning Crusade, that we're looking at the old client and we're looking at the old lighting. Even the way the zone was arranged, how the trees were placed, and the density of the bushes, like that's all stuff that we were considering as we were making this.
As a dungeon artist, we build the architecture for WoW. When rebuilding Quel'Thalas, we realized pretty quickly there is just a huge amount of content that we need to try to recreate. Not only just with Eversong and Silvermoon, but also the Isle and the Sunwell as well, which was actually patch content at the time. And on top of that as well, we now have flying. So whereas areas originally maybe weren't finished because players were never going to be able to see up above the rooftops, we needed to have it all fleshed out now. So there was a massive amount of work to do for this. So we're working really close with the world builders to try and establish a really robust modular kit, which is basically just like the building blocks. So you'll have various wall pieces, pillar pieces, staircases. So rather than a lot of the layout and flow of environments being on the dungeon team, we sort of give a lot of that handed over to world builders, and it gives them a little bit more autonomy and freedom to be able to figure out POIs and layouts from their end, just using these building blocks. One thing we realized looking at the old files for Silvermoon is it was actually built in one really large 3D model file. But nowadays, with our modern workflows, that's not really practical, especially with how many people we need to collaborate with and how many moving parts there are. So when we have the modular kit, it's a lot more flexible. And then beyond that, that's what also allowed us to build out places like the Sunwell. Rather than having to create all of that from scratch, the world builders are able to go into WoW Edit and apply the same process but for the Sunwell. And it just frees the dungeon artists up to be able to focus on the more bespoke spaces like the Sanctum of Light or the Sun Fury Spire, and just spending a lot of hours just making those places really, really beautiful. One of the challenges with rebuilding Silvermoon is now we needed to not only have the Horde side, but also an area that was safe for Alliance players. And the challenge with that as a game designer is how do we communicate to players, this section is safe for you, whereas this section, you're gonna get beat up if you go here. So one of the ways that the dungeon team tried to convey that was mainly through the color of the domes. One of the most important things was that it does still feel Blood Elf, it does still feel Silvermoon. Something I realized was Silvermoon actually had a lot of gold domes, and I thought maybe we could lean into that a bit more. By leaning into gold on the neutral side, it takes out some of that red, and then we can sort of play up the red on the Horde side a bit more. And we also use yellow trees on the Alliance neutral side, and we use red trees on the Horde side. It still feels Blood Elf, still feels like Silvermoon, but hopefully Alliance players can pick up on where they can go.
As a world designer, we place the trees, the buildings, and in Silvermoon's case, placed every single pillar, every single wall, every single building. Gave it a breath of fresh air for the new era. I was playing in BC, so Silvermoon has a fond place in my heart and in my memory, and I really wanted to do it justice. One of the really difficult things about the way old Silvermoon was built was the fact that it was very linear and it was all facade. So there was no flying. You could very easily kind of smoke and mirrors things to give illusions of grandeur and connectivity, but it's not ideal to have to go through only one way through the city to get to another district. So I really wanted to make sure to connect these different districts in ways that made sense in order for traversal to be a little bit easier. And then also, of course, we had to think about flying, so no longer do we have the facades just to kind of hide all the tricks of the trade. We have to really flesh out the city as if it's a living city. One of the things that we wanted to do was remove the Dead Scar entirely, but it's such a massive part of what has happened to Quel'Thalas that I really felt like we needed some kind of distinct memorial for the events that affected everyone. I ended up creating the Memorial Gardens to the west as an anchor for the western neutral side of the city. So this is an early iteration of the Memorial Gardens. There's a bunch of things that have changed as development went along. One of the things that we really had to nail was As with all cities, you really want your opening shot just to be gorgeous, awe-inspiring. But in this case, I also really wanted to focus on the Shepherd's Gate entrance, which was the original Silvermoon entrance to the city. I wanted to make sure that we really kept that as close to the original as we could, as a nod to the Horde players who have been coming here for the last 20 years. You can see I just copied and pasted the original textures from the original Silvermoon, just so I could get a solid base for the spatial relationships. And this is the Shepherd's Gate, which I felt was really important to maintain something like the original as close as possible. So here you come in centered to the main building here, and we ended up moving it, shifting it over to be more true to the original, to where it's not completely dead on. It's really important to make sure that players have that sense of wonder when they walk into a space like Silvermoon, just because it's already such a magical city. And I think that the grandeur that we were able to achieve with all of the different elements that we put together have made this city feel lived in. Just trying to put every little nook and cranny, a story here, something to discover. I felt that was really important.
The role of sound design in video games is responding to all the content that all the other disciplines have made. We have gameplay mechanics we want to communicate. We have all the amazing world building. We want to flesh out the sound portions of that. What does the world sound like? So it's the aesthetics, it's gameplay, it's narrative elements, all the different things that collectively make up the experience of being in that space. When we're making content for a legacy zone, there's kind of two things that I'm concerned about. One is, has the lore changed? Like, what's different today than the first time we were in this zone, right? We have memories of what the place might have been, and a game like World of Warcraft, we spend so much time in these zones that kind of get baked into our brains. What do we want to change and why? So in the case of the Cinderai, they've gone on a journey, they've done a lot of stuff, the city has changed, so we want to make sure that the sound reflects that. The other thing that I care about is the audio fidelity. There were a lot of limitations back in Burning Crusade came out, the first time we're setting foot in the city. There's only so much you can do with ambience. There's a stereo loop that plays, and it plays on a loop for every couple of minutes. It's potentially a little repetitive, but over the years we've been able to do more. We have more emitters we can place. An environment's more complicated now. We have more periodic sounds playing around your head. You have different sounds coming from different locations. Everything's more grounded, so if you rotate your camera, your players moving around, you can tell that the sounds coming from the north are actually coming from the north, which is different than the older tech. We don't want to just lean on, well, we did this once a long time ago, we'll just use it again. We really need to kind of match the higher quality, the higher fidelity, while still feeling like it's the same city. Soundscape isn't just a sound, it's lots and lots and lots of sounds. So it's we call them zone tones, or these kinds of bass sounds. We'll place them in kind of a checkerboard pattern, so there's always sounds around you. And then on top of that, we can add randomized periodic sounds. So those are kind of like your occasional bird, your occasional wind rising and falling, or a cricket, those kinds of things. I think the scope of the city was pretty enormous for us. The number of states that players can be in, depending on where they are in the battle and the narrative, makes it very complicated. The array of different sounds that need to be present or not present is just technically challenging, but we really want to make sure that sound is reinforcing all these big moments. So this was definitely the most complicated city we've done so far, and I think we'll just continue trying to push the envelope with how complicated we can get in terms of selling all these details and selling the narrative.
I covered basically the entire ambience of Silvermoon City. What kind of informs me for my inspiration, at least for Silvermoon and maybe the Voidstorm, definitely a lot of wind. As you approach Quel'Thalas and that whole area, it starts to get dark. I needed to play up the feeling of impending doom. So I have waves, I have like more ocean sounds that start to happen as you approach Quel'Thalas, and then I have thunder crackling, even some maybe more processed thunder to make it feel otherworldly. For the Dawnmill, I used a crystal triangle, as well as like these two little finger chimes. But I wanted it to feel cleansed, right? Purified. I used the wind wand as well, and that is a really fun device that I made from stuff that I found at a craft store. Okay, so this is a wind wand, And I used it and processed it heavily to make one of the zone tones for the Voidstorm. And there's also a few like windy one-shots that I have, some periodics that play throughout. And this is kind of what this guy sounds like.
One of the things that I love about sound design, that this team loves about sound design, is getting to breathe the life that sound can kind of fill in the blanks for. It's really satisfying to go from it doesn't sound like anything to it sounds like a living, breathing city.
It was really cool getting to work with artists and designers and programmers on the team that are actually 20, 25-year veterans, and being able to pick their brains on why did you do X, Y, and Z 25 years ago. Being able to interact with them and ask questions about the zones that I played back when I was a kid, that was a really special experience for me.
I think one of the most heartwarming things and exciting things as a developer is getting to finally see players interact with the content. One of the coolest things that I've seen players reacting to is a lot of people wanting to level on a ground mount and actually not fly, just so that they can really immerse themselves and appreciate all the little details that we've all put in. And I think that speaks to a lot to our connection with this place, but also the care and the level of detail that's gone into building these places as well.